So shall I start? Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. So today we are blessed by the presence of Yechong Lu, who is professor and chair of the Department of Diplomacy at Zhengzhou University in Taiwan. So Professor Lu was previously vice president to the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, which is a leading think tank in Taiwan. Is engaged in research to do with democratization and policymaking. So Dr. Lu has published in a variety of outlets to do with U.S.-China relations, cross-strait relations, and foreign policy more generally. And so today he'll be talking about East Asian politics under the Biden administration. So welcome, Professor Lu. We're delighted to have you here today. And the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, especially for Dr. Dai and also our host, Dr. McNee, to host and organize this wonderful event. It's really my honor to join all of you this afternoon. Especially, I think I would like to thank the UCLA Asia Pacific Center for putting everything together. And I apologize for being a bit late due to some technical issues. For my presentation today, I was informed that maybe I can have about 35 to 40 minutes to do the presentation. And I think the most fruitful part would be the exchange of our views after my speech. So first of all, I would like to present the outline of my presentation today. There will be like 4 parts in my presentation today. I would like to highlight especially the US-China competition nowadays, because I think that is a determinant factor that has tremendous impact on the current situation in the Asia Pacific. And then I will move on to talk about the cross-strait relations nowadays, and then I will touch upon maybe to a limited extent on what is going to happen in the following few months with regard to the politics in East Asia. So first of all, let me explain a bit about my observation on the nature of US-China competition nowadays. We all know that the current competition between China and the United States is serious. As President Biden mentioned for many times. There were some factors behind all this. We all know that international structure, which means the distribution of national capabilities, that has a tremendous impact on how states interact with one another. Other than that, I think it is quite important we also pay attention to the state level and domestic politics, especially on the China side. We noticed just a couple weeks ago, Xi Jinping actually further consolidated his political power within the CCP. It has a lot of implications for the region. Some people are still questioning whether he is going to have his third term. But I think after this 6th plenum of the 19th Party Congress, it clears out all the doubts whether he is going to take his third term. More people right now are more curious about how and what he is going to do in his third term. And also, I think perceptions of the leaders also play a very important role in explaining US-China competition. We know that Xi Jinping is more like a strong man in Chinese history. Not only this, I think he played a very significant role in shaping the current regional order in the Asia Pacific and the Indo-Pacific, of course. Also, I think President Biden and his predecessor, President Trump, both gentlemen have their different interpretation about the leadership of the United States and also the relationship across the Pacific between China and the United States. For now, I'm so glad to see that on the US side, especially under President Biden, it seems to be the administration itself seems to be very pragmatic, not working against China just for domestic political consumption or the aggregation of personal political capital. So I think this is a very positive development across the Pacific. However, we know that the competition between the two big countries, it is very, very serious, as I just mentioned, in many, many ways. And in the months to come, I will get to that later. We hope to see something different. But I think if China continue its path to become a rising power, challenging the current international order, then that will be a serious problem. So I highlight here, the Chinese continue to say the overall situation in international affairs should be a win-win situation rather than a zero-sum situation. However, my understanding is what China under Xi Jinping is doing is more leaning to the zero-sum thinking rather than the win-win thinking. Or if the Xi Jinping leadership is talking about win-win, it's more like China wins more, you win little, something like that. So maybe my interpretation is wrong, but I think in reality we can find evidence supporting this kind of analysis. Other than that, one thing is also very, very important. The United States continue to say it is upholding a rule-based international order. However, on the Chinese side, they continue to emphasize the international order based on international laws. In other words, it is not to China, it is not a shared knowledge that everyone should follow rule-based. Rather, everyone should follow international laws. So some people are contending that right now there seems to be a Cold War between China and the United States. So I highlighted some basic natures which is changing over time. China right now is economically wealthy, still ruled by an authoritarian regime with stronghold on society. And more importantly, China is not shy from flexing muscles to neighbors and pursuing predominance in the region. And there seems to be an emerging ideological war between China and the rest of the world. However, having said that, there are two things worth noting. One is about China's ambition. The Chinese government continues to say they have no intention to replace the United States in world affairs. Also, the rest of the world is still wondering whether China under Xi Jinping or in Xi's dynasty can maintain stability and economic prosperity. So I think for those two issues, we still need to wait to see. However, on the diplomatic front, we can see that China under Xi Jinping continues to stress importance of the democratization in international relations. So this is quite different from what we have known about the rule-based international order. What is more importantly is China continues to emphasize the importance of multilateralism. However, this kind of multilateralism is carried out with Chinese characteristics, including exchange of interests, but not exchange the wide accepted norms in international affairs. Also, China is trying to sell its thinking about the community of common destiny for all mankind. But I would say this conception remains very vague, even in the United Nations. Not so many countries are fully aware of what it is. But in the meantime, we can see that right now China occupies 4 out of 15 specialized agencies of the United Nations. more in-depth discussion on this issue have already been published by many experts and scholars. They tend to conclude that over time, maybe through this kind of occupation on important posts in international organizations, it will be more likely for China to expand its influence worldwide. Okay, after talking about the structural background about the US-China competition nowadays, let me turn to the cross-strait relations. It is also a very important question in debate nowadays that people begin to talk about whether the United States is abandoning its strategic ambiguity in the cross-strait relations related issues. For the idea of strategic ambiguity, we can date the idea all the way back to the 1950s, especially prior to the first Taiwan Strait crisis, which happened between the September 1954 to April 1955. Back then, the U.S. expressed that the U.S. does not state clearly whether it will come to Taiwan's defense in the event of any attack by PRC. The definition came from a very renowned scholar, Nancy Tucker. In her book, he stated that over time, in the past over 15 years, the United States continued to work on this strategic ambiguity, trying to cool both sides across Taiwan Strait down, and trying to maintain peace and stability across Taiwan Strait. And the main idea behind this thinking is it is a kind of deterrence by uncertainty, which means both sides across the Taiwan Strait, without fully aware of what the United States is going to react. So on the Chinese side, maybe China would find it might be very risky if any invasion of Taiwan is going to happen. And for the Taiwan side, which means they don't know if the Taiwan independence movement start any kind of fire across the Taiwan Strait, the United States would come to rescue or not. So they may have to think twice before taking actions. So we can see that there are some benefits of this strategic ambiguity. The first one is the conception amidst the disagreement without breaking up, especially between Taiwan, China, and also between China and the United States. This can also help avoid head-on confrontation or showdown, especially for U.S. managing its relationship with PRC. Third, it helps to preserve privileged positions, especially on the U.S. side. The U.S. can continue to play as an offshore balancer on this cross-strait relations, a trustable third party to both sides. So this is in U.S. interest. Uncertain and deniable in nature, that is also another thing about this strategic ambiguity. So without any possibility for entrapment for the U.S. to be engaged with China militarily, I think this conception serves U.S. interest the best. In the meantime, some discussions also highlight there are already some problems of this strategic ambiguity. For one, it is not morally defensible, especially to Taiwan. We all know that there are a lot of grassroots groups in the States supporting Taiwan very much. They continue to say the United States should be on the Taiwan side because Taiwan is relatively weak and small. However, this strategic ambiguity can prevent the United States from taking more actions in helping Taiwan. So they say that Taiwan is a democracy. The U.S. is the leader of the democratic world. So U.S. should do more to help Taiwan. This creates certain kind of moral issues for the United States. Also, secondly, this idea might be misleading to Taiwan or face underinterpretation on the China side. So even we have talked about this can prevent Taiwan from taking provocative actions to declare de jure independence, can prevent China from taking risky military actions against Taiwan. However, in the meantime, if both sides just misinterpret the idea and the intention of the United States, there will be some misperception in this regard. Then the outcome, the result, can be very problematic. Third, the idea itself may lead to mistrust and worsen the relationship. Especially nowadays, we can see that China's growing suspicion of the United States. And also, one other very fundamental issue is we all know that in the past more than 60 decades, Taiwan and China, throughout the history, we have serious confrontation, but we also have economic engagement and interactions. So over time, especially on the Chinese side, they continue to say it is in the foreseeable future, Taiwan would unify with China because people-to-people exchanges is growing, economic interactions is very positive and also growing. So this can not prevent Taiwan from being drawn into China's orbit, especially under coercion, as we see nowadays. So some people are saying there are a lot of problems of strategic ambiguity, and even arguing that the conception of strategic ambiguity has already been outdated. But what this conception really is, we have talked about that. And in history, what kind of evidence we have arguing that this conception is helpful in managing the cross-strait relations, especially from the US side. I went back to the crisis across the Taiwan Strait throughout history. And I found that it is quite important for the US to uphold this concept. For example, in the second Taiwan Strait crisis, which lasted for only 2 months, for only 2 months. But the impact of this, because China decided at last to have the bombardment on Jinmen on alternate days, it lasted until the end of 1970s. So it is quite long. Back into this second Taiwan Strait crisis, back then, especially after the first Taiwan crisis, the US understand it is quite important to make it clear that United States is on the Taiwan side in the event of PRC's attack. So both sides, the US and the Republic of China, the Taiwan side, they signed this mutual defense treaty in the December of 1954. In the December of 1954. And during this second Taiwan Strait crisis, Dulles, back then, the Secretary of State, he released a statement which maintained that the United States is bound by treaty to help defend Taiwan or Formosa from armed attack, and the President is authorized to employ the armed forces of the United States for the securing and protecting of related positions, such as Quemoy and Matsu. This is quite important, and this is a strategic clarity, not ambiguity, that helped deter PRC during that period of time. So, as we can see, in the second Taiwan Strait crisis, one is there is a mutual defense treaty between the United States and Taiwan. Secondly, the U.S. continued to express its intention to help Taiwan and to help defend Taiwan. This is quite important. However, as I just mentioned, it is not only China continue to do this bombardment on alternate days, but also after this crisis, the Chinese decided to develop its nuclear weaponry system. So we can see that strategic clarity can serve the U.S. interest and Taiwan's interest in this kind of event. However, there will be some consequences after exerting this kind of clarity. The third Taiwan crisis is also worth noting because it happened in the March of 1996. During that period of time, we all know that Taiwan's former president Li Denghui paid a visit to his alma mater, Cornell University. It is a welcome message from the U.S. Congress indicating U.S. support for Taiwan. However, it totally antagonized the Chinese side because it is not only about China's space, but also because right before the U.S. Congress passed the resolution to invite President Li for the visit, just before this passage of the resolution, the Chinese government was informed by the U.S. side saying that the administration is not going to grant this kind of visa to President Li. However, with strong support from the Congress, the administration finally granted the visa to President Li and made his trip possible. So the Chinese side, they are not only losing face, they are also losing their trust in the U.S. government back then. So they reacted very, very strongly. They conducted several rounds of military exercise surrounding Taiwan. And in March that year, Taiwan was having its very first direct presidential election. So on the Chinese side, this is not only a U.S. support for Taiwan, supporting Li Denghui to be the next president of Taiwan, but also this election gave high legitimacy to the Taiwanese government because it indicates the Li Denghui government after 1996 enjoy the full mandate from the people of Taiwan. So this is a deviation from the Chinese long-time position that Taiwan is part of China. So this creates more problems to the Chinese leadership. So during that period of time, especially in March 1996, before Taiwanese people cast their votes for the election, the United States sent out two warship, including Nimitz and Independence, the carrier groups to the surrounding area of Taiwan to indicate the U.S. intention in preserving peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. This is quite important. However, as we know, because during this period of time, the Mutual Defense Treaty already been revoked. The treaty itself was revoked in 1979, during the time that the United States decided to establish its diplomatic relationship with PRC. So the Clinton administration sent out these two battleship groups under the idea of strategic ambiguity, not strategic clarity. However, what we have learned from this crisis is it seems to be a asymmetric situation between China and the United States, in the sense that China sees Taiwan as a core interest. But still, until today, we are not sure how much weight Taiwan is carrying in U.S. national interest. Having said that, we all know the U.S. different administrations continue to stress the importance of Taiwan, and especially in economic terms. But politically and on security terms, it remains unclear whether, especially to Taiwanese people, we are not sure whether Taiwan play as a core interest to the United States. Okay, over time, we can see that it is the idea strategic ambiguity is in the interest of the United States, and it is also in the interest of U.S. that both sides across the Taiwan Strait would demonstrate self-restraint, because U.S. remain unclear on its attitude of involvement if conflict ever occurred. If we went through the One China policy, which is also a revelation of this strategic ambiguity, or the debate whether U.S. should change its ambiguity to clarity vis-a-vis China. But U.S. One China policy is actually a means to an end. What are the contents in this U.S. One China policy? Of course, it includes 3 communiques between the United States and the PRC, and also the Taiwan Relations Act, and also the 6 assurances. The essence of this One China policy is the peaceful resolution. It is quite important for both sides across the Taiwan Strait to sort out this dispute by peaceful means. This is what the United States continue to express. Also, under this idea of strategic ambiguity, the United States, by not giving either Taiwan or China a clear commitment, the U.S. can discourage both sides from taking unilateral actions to change the status quo. And what status quo means, that is a big question. And I believe our participants would have something to say about this status quo. But from the U.S. perspective, it is mainland China and Taiwan are separately governed by 2 political entities across the Taiwan Strait. Here still begs the question. China continues to say the United States is deviating from its One China idea. We will get to that later. And also, from the Chinese perspective, the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan seems to be very, very, very problematic. Especially over time, it helped the Taiwanese people to grow their own confidence vis-a-vis China's proposal to unification. But I would say for the One China policy, in the past 30 years, it actually served some functions. For one, it acknowledges the legitimacy of PRC, which gave the legitimacy for the United States to engage with China. Arms sales to Taiwan, this is quite important to boost Taiwanese people's confidence while interacting across the Taiwan Strait with China. However, one thing is very, very important. Taiwan's future status. For this one, the U.S. Remains an unclear position on the status of Taiwan. But this is very, very important for Taiwan, for the United States. But also this creates, from time to time, some kind of differences between the United States and China. One thing is very, very important. Under the Clinton administration, as I just mentioned, Taiwan has its very first national presidential election, especially by the general voting of the all public qualified citizen living in Taiwan. So democratization becomes, over time, a very serious and important element to U.S. One China policy. So after 1996, under the Clinton administration, the administration continued to emphasize the importance of peaceful resolution with the assent of the people of Taiwan. This is quite important. To Bush Jr., 43, the president himself once said the U.S. would do whatever it took to help Taiwan defend itself. While engaging with Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao, President also says that there shouldn't be any unilateral change across the Taiwan Strait. And also, he mentioned peaceful resolution with the assent of the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Okay. So this is a little bit different. Under Obama, Obama continued this one China policy with strategic ambiguity. Three things continue to appear in Obama's statement regarding the cross-strait relations. One is, of course, peaceful resolution of disputes. Second, the opposition to unilateral actions taken by either side. And third, the U.S. expressed its encouragement to dialogues. So these three things seem to complement one another in achieving U.S. abiding interests across the Taiwan Strait. So this remains very, very important. Under President Trump, however, things began to become very, very interesting. Whether and how the U.S. would respond depending on the circumstances seemed to be a clear encouragement for preemption with regard to the cross-strait relations, especially when China is enjoying a huge gap vis-a-vis Taiwan in economic and military terms. So from the very beginning, because President Trump, on the Chinese side, their interpretation of President Trump is he is more a transactional leader in nature. So China, for a very short period of time, has become very assertive and provocative in cross-strait relations. However, in the meantime, we still see that the six assurances appeared in the party's platform during the campaign. This is a reassuring message to Taiwan, along with when President Trump was the president-elect, he had a phone call with President Tsai of Taiwan. In that phone call, we all know that it is not only the courtesy call, it is also very, very politically symbolic to both sides across the Taiwan Strait. So China reacted to that phone call seriously. However, after 2 months, President Trump also made a phone call with President Xi, recommitted the U.S. One China policy, under which the U.S. maintains only unofficial relations with Taiwan, while also upholding the TRA, the Taiwan Relations Act. And in his National Security Strategy report, the report itself says that the U.S. will maintain our strong ties with Taiwan in accordance with our One China policy, including our commitments under the TRA to provide for Taiwan's legitimate defense needs and deter coercion. What is more important is we all noticed that under President Trump, especially after 2016, because President Tsai belongs to DPP, it is deemed as a pro-Taiwan independence party by the Chinese side. So China began to take very aggressive actions across the Taiwan Strait. I will show about the PLA air fighters getting close to Taiwan's ADIZ later. Okay, also under President Trump, we can see there seems to be an opportunity for Taiwan to continue to pursue closer ties with the United States. One thing is very, very important. There seems to be a bipartisan consensus in US Congress that US should take actions against China's predatory economic practices and military and political interference around the world. So it is for the first time after the end of Cold War that Congress and the administration are on the same page against China. So I just highlighted this act passed by the Congress. The very last two, they were just introduced to the Senate and also to the Congress, respectively. But President Trump did sign this Taiwan Travel Act into the public law in March 2018, which allows the high-level officials on the Taiwan side to pay visits to the United States. And also the second one, the Taipei Act, it is a act that asks for the United States to help Taiwan push back diplomatically against China's coercion, stealing or cutting off Taiwan's diplomatic allies around the world. The Taiwan Defense Act, along with the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act, those two acts, as I just mentioned, they were just introduced. But the content and the main idea of these two acts seem to be a little bit provocative, because especially for the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act, in which some red lines was drawn by US congressmen, proposing that if CCP direct attack Taiwan or military or CCP occupation of territory effectively controlled by Taiwan, or in the event that any mortal threat to lives of Taiwanese soldiers or civilians, the US should respond militarily to protect Taiwan. So for this kind of discussion and legislation, to the China's eyes, it seems to be that the US is supporting Taiwan independence, something like that. So this might be certain kind of misinterpretation. However, there are more and more calls, especially under President Biden, that the United States should drop its ambiguity and change to strategic clarity on this cross-strait relations issues. So as we can see, Richard Haass he published an article saying that it is the way to avoid a conflict between China and the United States if we can adopt strategic clarity. However, on the administration side, it is quite interesting, even for Pompeo, before leaving the office during the campaign. He once said the State Department is not changing its Taiwan policy, even amid the cost to depart from the long-standing strategic ambiguity in the Taiwan Strait. In May this year, Kurt Campbell, we all know he played a very significant, important role in the Biden administration with regard to the Indo-Pacific policy. He once said there are some significant downsides to the kind of what is called strategic clarity, referring to any conflict between the US and China over Taiwan would not likely to be contained to a small geographic area. This is quite important because Kurt Campbell actually highlighted the possible spillover or ramification impact if war occurs between between the United States and China. However, for President Biden himself, we all know that in late October, he once said, yes, the United States we have a commitment to do that to come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked Taiwan. But right after his remarks, White House says that our support for Taiwan is rock solid and committed to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. But the policy itself has never changed. What is more important and noteworthy is President Biden, while having the virtual conference with President Xi on November 15th, he laid out U.S. One China policy, and he changed the order for the mentioning about 3 communiques, TRA, and 6 assurances. He highlighted the importance of TRA, so he prioritized the TRA in his statement, saying that the One China policy is guided by the TRA, the 3 communiques, and the 6 assurances. This is quite important and very indicative. It is true that TRA is a domestic law for the United States, and any administration in the States has to abide by it. But from the Chinese side, they are saying, okay, this is a serious deviation from the One China policy upheld by different U.S. administrations. So after this statement, the Chinese side continued to send out 3 messages about this meeting. One is they asked the United States to stick to the One China policy. Second, Xi Jinping also mentioned some red line in his discussion with President Biden over Taiwan. And thirdly, the mouthpiece of the CCP, the official mouthpiece of the CCP, such as 人民日报 or 环球时报, continue to criticize the United States for supporting Taiwan independence. Okay, and then after that, President Biden also made some other remarks. However, the White House continued to say the U.S. policy remained unchanged. I think overall, if we are going to make an assessment about this strategic ambiguity, I think it is quite important to highlight this is a suboptimal outcome, which might be not satisfied, but acceptable to each party involved in this cross-strait relations. And what is more important is, in the first place, and until now, the United States and Taiwan are the supporters for the status quo, and thus limiting the discussion of strategic ambiguity to security issues. And U.S. has remained in politically ambiguous position across the Taiwan Strait. By acknowledging China's position that there is only one Chinese government while maintaining robust, unofficial relations with Taiwan. China, however, is mixing strategic ambiguity with political ambiguity and trying to redefine the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. In other words, China continued to stress that Taiwan is only a renegade province of China. So what are the implications for Taiwan and for East Asian politics? One thing deserves more of our attention. After November 15, when President Biden and President Xi had their virtual meeting, the Chinese PLA Air Force continued to conduct this kind of flight cruise across the Taiwan ADIZ. Okay, as we can see from here, this is the total number on November 28th. In that single day, the PLA Air Force conducted 27 flights getting into this area. Okay, the south part of Taiwan's ADIZ. And in whole November, there were 159 flights conducted by the PLA Air Force in this area. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense, beginning in September 2020, releasing this kind of report on a daily basis. And we can see in the past a bit more than 1 year, usually it is the October that is the busiest high season for PLA to conduct this kind of military exercises, because it is quite symbolic. Both sides across the Taiwan state have their respective national day in October. And also, in the past few months, we witnessed more and more U.S. and its allies conduct military exercises in the Indo-Pacific. So China says, okay, this is more a reaction to that, not only trying to deter Taiwan from taking any position for independence. And following that, Taiwan continued to say we stick to stability and no provocation. But quite interestingly, about a month ago in early November, there was a survey conducted by a very famous professor in Taiwan. It's a private think tank. It's about the Taiwanese public opinion under the military crisis across the Taiwan Strait. So the very first question is, for some reason, do you agree that the war would occur sooner or later across the Taiwan Strait? Especially this attack would be initiated by the Chinese side. It is quite interesting. For the respondents who hold disagreement about this statement is more than 60%. Okay, it's more than 60%. In other words, right now in Taiwan, there are still more than 60% saying that no, there is not going to have a war across the Taiwan Strait. But comparing to last year, as in this slide, the upper right hand side, as you can see, comparing to a year earlier, there seems to be a little bit more people saying that, okay, a war across the Taiwan Strait is going to happen in the near future. Because last year, who are holding disagreement about the statement was a record high. It's more than 67%. Okay, but on the left-hand side, as you can see, the question is, are you confident in that Taiwan's military force can effectively defend Taiwan? About 48% of the respondents said yes, but about 46% of the respondents says no. Okay, they don't have the confidence that our military force can effectively defend Taiwan. One very, very interesting question is about, if China attacks Taiwan, will U.S. military come to Taiwan's defense? Okay, this is a very, very interesting question. More than 65% of the respondents says yes, it is quite likely that U.S. is going to help Taiwan. Only 28.5% respondents says no, it's quite unlikely that U.S. is going to help defend Taiwan militarily. However, over time, there seems to be a trend, like the figure in the bottom showed. More and more people are saying, especially for these two categories on the left-hand side, more and more people believe that the U.S. would send its troops to help Taiwan. Okay, more and more people believe that. Okay, how about the role of Japan? Okay, will Japan's military come to Taiwan's defense? About 58% people says yes, they are going to help Taiwan. And also, one last question is about, will there be local collaborators from within to help China if a war occurred? More than 50% respondent says yes. So this shows there seems to be a national domestic cohesion issue in Taiwan. Okay, so what is so important? I think for now, the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is still in line with Taiwan's current interest. So we really need U.S. Assistance politically to deter Chinese ambition across the Taiwan Strait. But in the meantime, as I just mentioned, there seems to be one of the downsides if the U.S. choose to shift to strategic clarity. The ramification effect would draw U.S. allies, not only U.S., but also U.S. allies in this area to respond to China's military attack across the Taiwan Strait. But we see that Japan right now has a new prime minister. And also for U.S. ROK alliance, Moon Jae-in is going to step down next year, in May next year. And Korea is going to have their presidential election in March next year. So what is going to happen? And also, another very important ally to the United States is the Philippines. The Philippines is going to have their presidential election too in May next year. So what is going to happen while U.S. allies are having their domestic political needs? And whether this is a good timing for U.S. to militarily respond to China, I think that remains a big question. So in the future, we still need to pay attention to this China factor in domestic politics in East Asia. Okay, I think I'll stop here. Sorry, I'm a bit over time, and all comments and questions are welcome. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Professor Liu, for a very stimulating and comprehensive talk. You really covered all the bases. I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions. Certainly I have some, but I thought I would start with pivoting to Shuchan Dai, who is a postdoctoral researcher at UCLA and who helped organize this talk. Shuchan, do you have any questions for Professor Liu?
Yes, and thank you, Professor Liu, for your great presentation. I learned a lot from your talk. And I'm just wondering that it seems to be the case that keeping the status quo seem to be have long been the norm among Taiwan, US, and China. And in your opinion, which party might take the initiative to change the status quo? And how would the other parties react to the change if such change occurred? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dai, for this very good question. I think for now, it seems to me that China not only has the intention, but also has the capabilities to shake the boat for its domestic concerns and also to achieve Xi Jinping's the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, this China dream thing. One thing is also very, very interesting. While I was talking to some Chinese scholars a couple of weeks ago, I raised a question to them. I said, there seems to be a growing nationalism on the Chinese side, which could, in return, constrain the policy choices of the top leadership. Their responses were quite interesting. They said that, yes, there seems to be this kind of trend, and this growing nationalistic sentiment in the case of China is actually a mixed outcome for many issues. Its domestic economic situation, its overall foreign policy, something like that. But I think we call some very fervent nationalists as little pinks nowadays. I think these little pinks did play a constraining role if Xi Jinping is trying to engage with Taiwan politically or to have this kind of conversation or dialogue across the Taiwan Strait. And I'm afraid in the following few years, still China would use this kind of nationalism to further justify its ruling in China, especially the CCP's ruling in China. But in the meantime, trying to change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. So I think China is the one who is going to change the status quo.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I suppose I also wonder about the US as well. Obviously, the US political system is experiencing its own kind of crisis right now. So, how do you see the potential return of President Trump changing the situation in across the strait? Obviously, bipartisan policy in the US has evolved to be harder on China, but you mentioned during your talk that President Trump is also highly transactional, so he's almost a bit more unpredictable. So, how do you see the next US presidential election shaping events across the strait?
Yes, I think it is quite important for the United States to continue this very pragmatic way dealing with the cross-strait relations issues under President Biden. So if Trump gets back to become the president again, I think for the Chinese side, they might have been prepared for that to a certain degree. So on the Chinese side, I think they would try to satisfy President Trump to a certain degree, especially on economic terms. However, I would say there seems to be a structural constraint to US-China relations. So China, as a rising power, would continue to challenge the United States no matter who is in charge. So I think this is a big problem. So even for Trump to become the president again, I think the United States still have to keep a sober eye on the development of China, especially Xi Jinping's intention for this region. Yes.
So I want to pivot to the audience. If please post your questions in the chat if you have any questions for Professor Liu. Yeah, so Xi Jinping is the X factor in many ways. Everyone's left guessing about his long-term intentions. Oh, I see there are some questions in the Q&A. I must have missed them. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I did not use this platform before. Okay. Yeah, so Wang Chunhan asked an important question. You talk a little bit about Japan, but obviously any conflict in the Strait would implicate the whole region, and we certainly see Australia, trying to, form the new AUKUS alliance and the Quad being elevated, etc. Do you see the potential for the region for kind of counter-China alliance to solidify in response to increasing belligerent actions across the strait, or how do you think the broader region is going to feature in the ongoing conflict?
Yes. Okay. Very good question. I think in the years to come, for this region, I think if we are going to have stability and peace in this region, China needs to somehow change its behavior, especially to many others. China's wolf warrior diplomacy is very counterproductive. Okay, it's very counterproductive. For other countries, I think we should have more dialogue and more mechanism to exchange our views, to exchange our notes about our understanding about China. But in the meantime, I don't think a full version of containment against China is going to work, because so many countries in this region still have very strong economic ties with China, even though everybody is trying to divert their investment in China because the overall environment is changing right now. But take Taiwan, for example. In the past 2 years, we still, all our export, more than 40% still goes to China. Okay, so this is a very, this is the realistic part of the world. So I think for the years to come, we should oppose China's assertive behavior, China's aggressive actions, but not necessarily to form an anti-China camp.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for another question. So from Catherine Tai, she asks, your slides on public opinion in Taiwan were very interesting, and it seems to be that despite all the headlines about increasing tensions, that people are very sanguine in Taiwan today about the threat posed by China. Well, what do you think is going on?
Yes, I think the polls in Taiwan is quite interesting in two ways. My takeaway is one is for most people living in Taiwan, we don't see that war is going to happen tomorrow. Still, we are quite confident that it is not going to happen. The second thing is we have a very high degree of confidence in U.S. role if any war occurs across the Taiwan Strait. I wouldn't say these two views are very, very pragmatic, but I did talk to some of my students and also to my neighbors to talk about what is going to happen, do you think, if China invades Taiwan? Some of them gave me some very politically correct answer. They said that I will fight until I die, something like that. But many people responded that they are going to wait and see to see what is going to happen. So I'm not sure how much this is relating to Taiwan people's pragmatic view about the world. But I think even for people living in Taiwan, we continue to say we need to deal with uncertainties. So I believe most people in Taiwan right now are not going to make up their mind and speak it loudly to the world what is going to happen if a war really occurs. So that's not good for social scientists because we wouldn't be able to learn from the outcome. Yeah, but I think this is what people really think in Taiwan.
Great, yeah, thank you. Look, this was a fascinating presentation, and we are out of time, so I will wrap up now. But I just want to say thank you to Professor Liu for your excellent presentation and for presenting to the audience. So I just want to note that this talk was sponsored by the Asia Pacific Center at UCLA, and the Taiwan in the World program has been supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Taiwan and TECO Los Angeles. And this is part of the center's broader Taiwan Studies program. So I want to say thank you to the Executive Director, Elizabeth Lester, Assistant Director, Aaron Miller, to Dai-Su Chan for organizing this, and of course to Professor Liu for his talk. So thanks so much, everyone, and hopefully all work out well in the end.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to again express my gratitude to all the organizers and also to the audiences for your contribution. I'm really glad that I can have this opportunity to share my personal views with you, and I hope to meet all of you maybe in person or by virtual means in the near future. Thank you very much.
All the same to you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, Professor
you.
Lu. Thank you, Laklam. Thank you, Shichan. Good night.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye-bye.